All right, so we're just gonna kind of be free talking here for assignment nine, or week nine, I suppose. So this was about the different various topics that were pretty sensitive and heavy. Um, and I kind of wanted to go into sort of an offshoot, as this is a philosophy course, but I feel like also an ethics course in a lot of ways. We breach a lot of subjects that talk about why these things might happen, or is it right that such things might happen? Not necessarily in this, but when we talk about medicines, prescriptions, screening for certain medicines, we've talked about ideas of, are we over screening or over kind of emphasizing certain treatments, and are insurance companies taking advantage of that? I know I'm like bristling over a lot of different topics, but oftentimes when we go into these discussions, we are always kind of, quick to be skeptical and kind of call out insurance companies for wrongdoings they do in the healthcare field. But on the same time, when we hear about the screenings and maybe over screenings and maybe over diagnoses of things, yes, we can see a kind of nefarious tone to it, but we also have the ability to maybe be sympathetic towards another angle, and say, hey, well, maybe there is like a good in this, or maybe there's a perceived good that people really are just trying to get more screening and more awareness. And invariably, maybe they're actually hurting people. But at the same time, if somebody is exhibiting certain symptoms, you may screen them for something just because you want to make sure they're okay, right? As a provider, while, unfortunately, maybe putting them through a lot more tension and stress because of a judgment that they're throwing up and feeling sick, and it could just be that they have some kind of minor food poisoning rather than some variation of colon cancer or something. So the point I'm making is that a lot of the times when we talk about the ethics of really any topic in this class so far, I think there were always caveats to kind of make a stance on and say, hey, this sort of makes some sense, and I can see why it's done this way, and I can see why somebody would argue that this isn't ethically black and white. But with this week's topics, with the camp studies, the Tuskegee experiment, and things of that nature, you really don't have a gray moral line. It's extremely black and white. I wanted to go to a topic that is somewhat paralleled, but I think very likely had we not have been had been, excuse me, in war with Germany to the point of total collapse for Germany, and they had kind of negotiated a more stable sort of surrender, we would have had a similar experience with. And specifically, uh, what I wanted to talk about was Unit 731 in Japan. So, for context, obviously, we had negotiated a peace treaty with Japan after dropping a couple of nukes, and that peace treaty also came with a lot of exoneration for, is exoneration the right word? I believe so. For a lot of people who were definitely going to be under hot water in the future. Now, obviously, we didn't have like entire knowing of exactly what was going on in said places, or said rumors and rumblings and stuff. More of that got uncovered post-war. But Unit 731 effectively was a human experimentation site where Japanese um, soldiers and scientists would take people from China primarily, although other Pacific locations as well, like I believe the Philippines, and just experiment on them really horrifically. The details go from things like killing people through exposed durations of hypothermia, to using explosives on people and seeing, like, if I put a bomb in this location 10 feet away and I put you 5 feet, closer to it, how much are you going to get destroyed? I'm going to put another person now with the same bomb 10 feet away. How much is that person going to get destroyed? obviously, if these were prisoners of war, this that would not make it any better, but these were ordinary civilians in uh, China and the Philippines at the time and all these things. And these countries, especially at the time, were very underdeveloped, rural, not like attacking Japan. This was very much a Japan attacking these countries, experimenting on them. There's no justification, is the point. There's no animosity. There's no Japan and China had a feud. None of that. Japan was just doing all of this stuff to China, to the Pacifics. And this is obviously in lieu of like hundreds of massacres, mass killings, rapes, and all of these things in those countries. But this is another kind of layer of it that's deeper, that's darker, and that was a lot less known until really, I believe, the 80s when a lot more of this information came out. And the experimentation at this camp goes much, much further. It goes to people being fanned alive by like fans literally just spinning and getting really hot and almost like baking people, I guess you could say, and just a lot of really wicked stuff. Um, and I believe estimates for this thing are very uh, uncertain because it's not something that was exposed to the public ever. It was kind of something that leaked through decades after when most people involved were either dead or long gone under different aliases. But every single person, and this is a true fact, literally every single person, and estimates range from about 4,000 to 40,000 in some extreme cases, died. 0% survival rate, um, which is just terrible. I mean, when we think of the worst camps in Europe, none of them, well, some of them did, extermination camps, smaller ones had 0% survival rates, but in terms of the worst horrors, I mean, even ones that were specifically death camps, there were small portions of people who survived. That doesn't make it any better or anything. It just means that this was so efficient, so calculated, so cruel and really disconnected, um, where literally every person who went to those things died horrifically from various kinds of experimentation. And we say all this to say that normally you would think, okay, well, you just went through this whole spiel. Surely all of these people who were involved were killed by, hanging and stuff like that post-war. No, not a single one did. So the United States were kind of given some information about what was going on. I think not the full information, but enough understanding to say it's human experimentation, torture, etc. And part of a kind of plea deal, as very similar happened with a lot of German scientists who participated in the Holocaust, we basically gave them full immunity. We said, okay, we're not going to try any of you guys for your crimes as long as you give us your data, excuse me. So every single person in that Unit 731 experiment who were scientists and soldiers and stuff walked scot-free because the United States uh, gave them full impunity to do so. Now, before I talk about the actual data, I think it's an important historical caveat to say that a lot of the United States policy was obviously under our general, not our president, it was under our general who was in the Pacific War, Pacific Theater, General MacArthur, and a lot of what he wanted to do to make sure there was stability in Japan because there was a very real fear and concern that Japan would just kind of rebel and be a horrific like terrorist kind of location in terms of like keeping it stable, like we see nowadays in a lot of countries. We didn't, get rid of their emperor, who was very much a bad person. We didn't get rid of a lot of public high ranking figures because we wanted that transition of power to be safer. We kind of big brothered the country as a whole to ensure a more peaceful transfer of powers into, more democratic capitalist society. However, the people in that high ranking class, the emperor, these were like religious figures effectively for that nation of Japan. And they were symbols of national pride. They mattered to the stability of the nation. A lot of these people and these scientists did not matter to the people. They didn't even know they existed. The Unit 731 was not something that the Japanese people openly knew about. This was effectively like a covert CIA type of, initiative. So we only know about this now from, decades later, but the Japanese people of the time and stuff, there would not have been some uprising or uproar or rebelling in relation to these people being killed because they were, not like part of the common populace. So I say all that to say these people being spared was purely for a kind of scientific, I suppose, greed to learn something. And surprise, surprise, when you learn about how hypothermia affects people in torture, effectively, if not quite literally, all of the information gained in this research was completely useless. So all these people got away scot-free for basically a bag of chips. I mean, there was nothing of value in this research, which I think was extremely obvious. I'm not going to lie, like, thinking about this just makes me mad because it's so stupid, right? These people basically just gave away research that was just, oh yeah, we killed a bunch of people and did a bunch of terrible things, the most brutal ways of all time, and we got pardoned and we gave you nothing of value, literally nothing. But even if there was something of value, that doesn't really excuse it. I mean, when you're running risks here from a idea of justice, I mean, could you imagine if a healthcare company was uh, injecting false medicines or something into someone and the government was prosecuting them and they got away by saying, we'll show you the effects of what it did and we won't destroy it, but you have to free us. I mean, could you imagine if that happened? And that's like so much tamer than what actually happens here. It's not even close to a parallel, really. That's like such a watered down version. And I guess it kind of takes me to a concept and an idea that I think in morality and ethics and philosophy we see a lot of. I'm assuming obviously there's got to be specific terms that would kind of detail this, but the notions and ideas that as people we see things and we experience things that other people experience through word of mouth and through news and whatnot, but we don't actually experience it ourselves, so we're able to make pardons for it a lot easier. I look at Unit 731 and think of American diplomats and generals and whatnot learning bits and pieces of this and kind of sweeping it under the rug because it's like, here's something we can clearly benefit from. What's done is done. We weren't personally affected. This didn't happen to us. This didn't matter to us. You might not say those words out loud, but you kind of subconsciously think them. It's almost like when you see an article in the news about people passing away and dying in a natural disaster halfway across the world. It's like you're like, man, that's terrible, that sucks, but you don't actually sit there crying about it, do you? You don't sit there grieving, not in the same way somebody does who watched it happen or who has a family member there. We're able to kind of compartmentalize things that are horrific if there's a personal gain, especially when we can kind of chalk it up to Fantasyland or just sort of honestly abridge our focus from it. I mean, if you say that these terrible things happen in this experimentation, but if you just kind of like don't think about the fact that that happened and here's all this new data, look how exciting this is. I mean, I can understand how that compromise was made, but it's still a horrific situation. And I think when you look at institutional distrust in the medical field, this isn't necessarily something that I would necessarily scream at as being like, here's an indicator of like distrust in the medical field, yada yada. But we have so much distrust, I feel like, as people in institutions, mainly because we look towards the government or we look towards health industry or we look towards anything that's kind of designed to protect us, and we can look and find times that uh, that didn't happen, and a lot of the times it's underreported. So who knows what's going to happen in 35 years? What are all the health insurance scandals and all these things that we're going to find out? So I guess to kind of put a bow tie on all of this, uh, there are times in philosophy and ethics where things look gray and morally ambiguous, and you can kind of meander around in circles and be really inconclusive and kind of just end up saying, "Oh man, you know, it's up to you. What do you think?" Right? And this is okay. That's fair. But when you see kind of the barbarism that uh, humans can go through, because these weren't, people from, these weren't Neanderthals. These were people less than 100 years ago, right? And my great, or not my great, my grandfather was born and lived as a young kid during the occupation in Poland of the Nazis, right? So he was around when that had happened, right? And I knew him very well. Obviously, he was a little kid, but the point is that there are people living, walking around who uh, were around when this was occurring. So this is not something that's like we're allowed to just kind of disconnect from and pretend was part of a less educated, uninformed, unaware group of peoples. That's not the case, and we don't have this luxury to pitter patter, excuse me, around this and say, oh, well, this thing happened. No, it was just quite frankly a complete f up by our country, and it didn't do anything. And I think sometimes we look to research in these fields and in these things in the medical field. It's a lot smaller scale, but you look at like animal experimentation for a lot of our things, and you wonder like how much of this is really actually doing anything, and in what world did we allow human experimentation to go unpunished in our country, in our government? And when we look at uh, how the government regulates a lot of our healthcare and stuff, do we really have the same trust and faith in them when we see a history of kind of low trust inspiring things that happen in our country that just get swept under the rug? I guess you kind of begin to wonder like what else are we 35 years away from learning that's going to just kind of shock us that's happening right now. So pretty harrowing things, and I realize it's maybe more of a pivot, but this was really the only thing with these topics that I think made sense. A lot of it, when you look at the stuff with the camps, it was very similar. We didn't get a lot of that information because a lot of it was destroyed. But I would think that had Germany negotiated to a peace treaty in a, I mean, they technically did, but that was like a complete defeat peace treaty. That wasn't quite the same. Uh, we probably would have, spared some of the people in the camps for the medical information, right? When it comes to like the twins testing and all that stuff. If we had an opportunity to, we probably would have, given the precedent of what happened in Japan, and that would have been completely useless and a complete waste and a complete absolution of justice. Which, I mean, yeah, is just bad. There's nothing good about it. So it sucks. Absolutely sucks. And yeah, I guess that's really all I have to say about it.